we had a lot
Yeah.
of discussion while we were listening to the interview about George and Susan's contributions with respect to finances. And we were going back and forth about the idea of like having an equitable solution to these things, and if there would be any angst as a consequence of one person contributing more than another. Now, of course, Jesse was able to talk about the idea is once you get to that place where everybody values each other's labor equally, and somebody that's doing the gardening and somebody that's bringing in the finances are of the same plane, it becomes actually a very logical choice. It doesn't have to be a thing of angst or animosity. Still, I feel the anxiety about knowing that somebody would bring in more than me, and then maybe feeling like there's a mismatch. I can imagine hearing how you're talking about it currently, that there was so much enthusiasm, that there were people that were coming for externally, that would, from my mind, if I were the financier, so to speak, that I would be excited to just contribute money because I want to see how big this thing grows. But how rocky, if at all, was that stage of navigating the idea of unequal financing?
Love your questions. They're just great questions. Just before you asked the question, I realized I was using the word we.
Okay.
And there's kind of a multiple we. And that's been the case from the very beginning. The large we is the people who are living here at a given time. But the people in San Francisco, one of the things that they started really looking at and thinking about and arguing about and debating and exploring was the idea that, and this was an idea that Susan brought in. She said, we should all be available to everybody with regards to everything, sexually, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so all the discussion started coming up. So there was this long line of thinking and arguing and debating, the pros and cons of all of this. And the basic thinking that Mildred was bringing into the game, okay, had to do with connection, relationship, thinking of yourself as you're not just what's inside your skin, et cetera, et cetera. And that the project had a very deep political objective, which was how do people live together and work out problems. And that's really what people were becoming really drawn to, is how can we live together and work out problems. And it's a research project. So from the very beginning, we were thinking of ourselves as a research project. Now the we I'm talking about now is a small number of people who are the actual founders and people who came and joined into that project as we went. So very early on, we had formed, it kind of emerged, but it was always there, and it got a little bit more formal, and we're even still formalizing it to this day, because we just invented ourselves into an LLC. So we called it, the name that came up was we're the core group.
Okay.
Okay. And now you used the word equity and equal. And one of the very radical aspects of this, the core group thinking and the intentionality behind the whole project, the concept of equal is distorted, or it distorts it. This is what I want to do. This is what I have to give, and I'm willing to give everything. So I don't know how much you guys are you all married or?
No.
we're not.
No.
We've been around a while though, about 6
Okay,
years
but-
together.
Okay. So do you think in terms of you're equal and what she's doing is equal and that, or is it much more in terms of, look, I want this and you're getting in the fucking way, that's, you know?
I think it's a little both.
I think it's both. I
Yes.
think we try to be equal, but there's an
Right,
element
then you
of
start
both. Depends on
measuring.
the situation.
Once
yeah.
you start talking equality, you're talking measuring.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And we wanted to get away from measuring.
Mm.
And the rule of thumb that we developed, that we wanted to try to live by, if somebody wants something from you, they ask you for something, you say yes, unless there's a good reason to say no.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Now you're not measuring anymore.
Right.
It's the measuring. So there was another community that had been around for about 20 years, and one of the key persons died, and it was breaking up, and they had a lot of different kinds of property and stuff, and they were going to have to go into how to negotiate this. And of course, by the time they got to the point to where they were breaking up and there was the property, et cetera, there was lots of tensions and things that hadn't got resolved, over the last 3 or 4 years, blah, blah, blah. And the advice that George was helping them, the advice that George said, in your first conversation, you want to start talking about what do each of you want. Do not get any conversation going in terms of what someone has a right to. And they settled the whole thing in one conversation.
Wow.
And they were all just, the whole right business was all right there on the edge. And that just opened another door, and everybody went through it.
That's interesting. That is a very big difference, huh?
A huge difference.
Yeah.
And a profound, politically profound difference.
Yeah. I wonder, and this, I correct me if I'm wrong, but when you talk about...
Let me just put one piece
Oh,
in
yes,
there to
please.
finish.
Yeah.
And from the very beginning, it wasn't a question of everybody's equal in terms of their work. It was a question of every job is essential. So no job should be compensated more, deserves more, et cetera, because every job is essential. And that was the idea behind that, not equality.
No.
Yeah. That makes sense. I wonder if in getting into that mindset, is there sort of like any sort of like spiritual practice of like letting go of your possessions and or like in service to each other, or is it
No.
purely just like a sharing economy, or like
No, I'm
does
in
any
this
of that
because
relate,
this is,
or
I'm in this because this is the way I want to live my life.
okay,
And I have these relationships.
yeah,
And I've built up, it's an in early part of the 2003 or 4, something like that, I turned about 63 or 4, and I said, look, I don't want to retire, but I want to step back and I want to start doing things that I want outside. There's a lot of stuff that I want to explore. And I started doing that, and as I was doing that, I realized at one point I just had a whole thing walking down the street in New York, in Manhattan. My God, this platform that I have is just so fucking incredible. I can do this because there is this platform. And I helped to build it, and I'm committed to it, and I'm committed to maintaining it. And it just was, wow.
yeah,
Circling.
We're talking the
Yeah.
core group right now.
yeah,
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The real distinction
right,
Yeah.